Tonight on All In.
I'm going to Washington to be your voice in the 9th Congressional District.
Not so fast. Renewed calls for a do-over in North Carolina.
A new election is not only appropriate, it is necessary.
Amid mounting evidence of egregious electoral fraud on behalf of the Republican candidate. I'll ask the head of the state GOP to explain.
Good Republican activists don't engage in this behavior.
And it's not just North Carolina.
This is bigger than that one seat.
What the Republican power grab in Wisconsin and Michigan means for democracy in America. Then,
what's come out of Manafort? No collusion. What's come out of Michael Cohen? No collusion.
The special counsel prepares to reveal just some of what they have on Manafort and Cohen. And Mr. Tariff Man,
we have a trade deficit with everybody,
gets hoisted on his own economic petard.
It's the economy, stupid. Did you ever hear that one? It's the economy.
And All In starts right now.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In the wake of Democrats' historic wins in this year's midterm elections, we are witnessing tonight a full-on assault on democracy by defeated Republicans across the country. You know, there's an old joke about the definition of chutzpah being a man who murders his parents and then asks the court for mercy because he's an orphan. Something somewhat similar is going on now with the Republican Party these days. For years, they've used the non-existent threat of voter fraud as a pretense to make it harder for Democratic constituencies, particularly people of color and young people, to vote. Even though study after study after study shows that actual in-person voter fraud is stupendously, vanishingly rare. That has not stopped Republicans from baselessly accusing Democrats of trying to steal elections. From Donald Trump claiming, with no evidence, making it up out of whole cloth, that he didn't lose the popular vote, to Florida Senator Marco Rubio tossing out a Bible verse suggesting Democrats are making up votes, to House Speaker Paul Ryan implying, again with no evidence, that the California elections are somehow not legitimate.
California just defies logic to me. We had a lot of wins that night. We were only down 26 seats the night of the election. And 3 weeks later, we lost basically every contested California race. This election system they have, I can't begin to understand what ballot harvesting is.
Meanwhile, in North Carolina, it appears the Republican candidate for Congress in the 9th District hired someone who committed systematic electoral fraud. And even though that Republican, Mark Harris, seemed to win by 905 votes, the State Elections Board has refused to certify those results, and there are now criminal investigations and criminal subpoenas underway. And tonight, some news. The Democrat in that North Carolina race, Dan McCready, is refusing to give up.
Over the last week, we have seen the criminal activity come to light, and we have seen that my opponent, Mark Harris, has bankrolled this criminal activity. And so as of today, I am withdrawing my concession to Mark Harris. And furthermore, I call on Mark Harris to tell the American people exactly what he knew and when he knew it.
And yet, as far as I can tell, not a peep from Paul Ryan or Marco Rubio or Donald Trump or any of the other many prominent Republicans who have peddled baseless conspiracy theories about Democrats stealing elections and voter fraud. What's worse, as people like Paul Ryan go out of their way to sow doubt with not a shred of evidence about the legitimate California elections, the thing that Ryan hinted at did appear to have actually happened in North Carolina, conducted on behalf of the candidate of his own party. And to top it all off, against the backdrop of a Republican campaign apparently caught red-handed engaging in electoral fraud, the state GOP in North Carolina is rushing to pass a new voter ID law in the lame duck session before they lose their supermajority, even though the fraud that did happen right under their noses has literally nothing to do with the fictitious in-person version Republicans use as a pretext. The whole thing is a shameless spectacle of bad faith, an assault by Republicans from the president on down on some of the most basic tenets of democracy. They want to restrict voting rights, make it harder to access polls, create doubt about legitimate elections, and if all else fails and they lose, refuse to hand over power as they leave office, like they're doing in Michigan and Wisconsin. Here with me now is Dallas Woodhouse, the executive director of the North Carolina Republican Party. Dallas, you saw Dick McCready's call for a kind of full accounting from Mark Harris about what he did or did not know. Don't you think everyone in North Carolina is owed that?
I think everybody in North Carolina needs to know everything. And I have to tell you, Mr. Hayes, I mean, we are as horrified by the news reports as we've seen as anybody else. They are revolting. They are not what our activists, our good people that work in campaigns, you know, the volunteers. This is not what they're about. They try to elect Republicans because they think Republicans have better policy ideas. The people that have engaged in this behavior down in the southern part of the state, they are political mercenaries. They are political hitmen. They don't care who wins, who loses, they don't care about budget policy. They just care about getting paid.
That appears to be the case. If that is the case, I do want to cite something you said in the days after the election where you said in a phone call, we are trying to keep Democrats from stealing the congressional race from Mark Harris. Now, that's obviously an incredibly loaded charge that you made. Do you want to apologize for that or take that back?
Well, no, because I made that call to donors of the North Carolina Republican Party, which you're not one of, I feel sure. But if you would like to be, we're at 1506 Hillsborough Street in Raleigh, North Carolina. No, but I think this.
But you were wrong, right? I mean, your position was this is a sort of made-up scandal, and the Democrats are out to try to steal this out from under our noses. We won 905 votes. They're refusing to concede. That proved to be wrong, right? I mean, you get out over your skis. There was actual, apparently, criminal activity.
Okay. Yes. What I would say is you know, there are a lot of different things going on here. The ground is shifting under our feet. You know, I don't think you can excuse the Democrats on the State Board of Elections that all of a sudden dropped this on our lap after no election protest was filed, after Mr. McCready conceded the election, after no recount was called for, and after all of the local boards of elections certified the race. We have never seen that happen.
Wait a second, though. Wait a second.
And sir, if I can just finish this one point, I apologize.
will let you.
And at the same time, the state is engaged in a very difficult negotiation and fight over the control of the Board of Elections.
That I know.
And so so the Board of Elections that's walking out the door simply comes out and says they're not going to certify, and at that time really don't say why.
Okay,
I mean, of course we're going to be suspicious of that.
That's a process complaint. Let's put that to the side, and I hear you, and I know that.
But you're asking me about what I said, and I think you have to put it in that context.
Well, let me give you some more context, right? Because as we look at this, it seems like there were some real red flags. And it seems to me like the North Carolina Republican Party failed its own Republican candidate, Robert Pittenger, the incumbent congressional Republican. These are the Bladen County mail-in absentee ballots for that primary race this year. Mark Harris, 437, having hired the man in question, McCrae Dowless, apparently to do the same scheme, over Robert Pittenger, who is the sitting incumbent. Now, you and I both know those numbers make no sense, and there's reporting today that Robert Pittenger's people talked to you personally and to people from the NRCC complaining about shenanigans, and nothing was done. Is that true?
You know, I've been trying to recall that. It might have been, if I can offer some context, you know, the Republican Party rules prevent us from being involved in a primary. We often get complaints about people who don't like what happened in their primary races, and perhaps we should have paid a little more attention. I'll plead guilty to that. But here's what I would say. The only thing we could have done is call state and federal investigators and the Board of Elections, which already knew and have been a part of this for, had been investigating this for a decade and haven't got their hands around it. That's all we could have done. And quite frankly, I looked at the overall vote numbers in Bladen County, and I saw that Mr. Harris won. I didn't look at the absentee numbers. You know, we don't usually question the...
I get it. I get it. I know. And believe me, if I was sitting in your position, that stinks. I mean, something happened under your nose. But you did fail Mr. Pittenger, didn't you? I mean, he was the incumbent member of Congress. He's a Republican. He lost to this challenger, and it appears that he lost partly because of a vote padding from an illegal vote scheme. The
fact that Mr. Pittenger is an incumbent member of Congress, of course, to the Republican Party rules, he is a candidate like any other. And if we failed Mr. Pittenger, his advisors failed him because he did not file an election protest. I mean, what were we to have done when the own candidate doesn't file the protest? I mean, there is a process for these things.
That's fair enough.
And look, we are as horrified by that as anybody. But I do think it's important that the people that committed the acts are the ones that need to serve the second term of the Pence administration in jail. They need to be punished. And I am appreciative of the media and you for putting sunlight to this. It is clear, Mr. Hayes, that there has been a systematic failure in the state of North Carolina, among Republican governors, Democrat governors, and Board of Elections going on back a decade to stop this.
Yeah, let me stop you there, because I want to sort of maybe argue on the other side for a moment. It does seem there are some persistent irregularities in Bladen, some persistent irregularities in Robinson. I think we might see some more things come to light. But the other thing is we now have caught this individual, it appears. Again, there's criminal subpoenas. I don't want to get out ahead of the facts. But my question to you is what happens now? I mean, it seems to me Mr. Harris, it's reported, had introduced McCrae Dowless, the man in question, to another Republican who was running for office, and said that he had a system. He said he was known for getting out absentee votes. Now, I don't know if he knew he was doing bad stuff or not, but it seems like there is some real questions that Mr. Harris has to answer about that.
And I think that's fair. I would say that Chairman Hayes, I, and all the party leadership know Mr. Harris. We know him to be an honorable, good man. It is my belief, I'm not in a court of law, I can't prove it, but it is our belief that people associated with the Harris campaign, consultants or whatever, would have had to mislead Mr. Harris, because he never would have been a part of it. It was not that important enough for him to win. His integrity, his bringing people to Christ is more important to him personally. I believe that. As far as what happens now, we've got to hear from the State Board of Election nonpartisan investigators sooner rather than later.
They're going to call. Don't you think? Shouldn't they? You were saying that they should certify the election just a few days ago and move forward. They should not do that, right? There should be. They should wait until they get the facts in and probably call a new election. Don't you think?
I would say yes to the first part of that. Absolutely, we believe the investigation should continue. Now, remember that the criminal investigations, both on the state and federal level, continue no matter what happens with the certification of Mr. Harris's race. It is our belief that the question of certification is a numeric one. If the Board of Elections investigators come out and they say that we have substantial reason to believe the outcome of this race could have been altered, then we absolutely should have a new election.
So wait a second. You think in a 905 vote margin, you think if they found that they'd stolen 904 votes, that he should still be certified?
Well, Mr. Hayes, no, sir, because if they found that many, you would have a substantial likelihood there were more.
Okay.
I mean, I think.
But you think, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. You think it's a numerical question?
If you let me ever finish, I would explain it to you.
Go ahead then.
Okay. Look, if it rises to a level that it puts the outcome in question, then we should have a new election. If they can assert and prove that whatever bad behavior that is going to be punished criminally could absolutely not have changed the outcome, then Mr. Harris should be certified. Okay. If it's in the middle, which is far more likely, it seems we should delay certification until, or the question of certification until the Board of Elections can answer that question for the people. And look, there's so many innocent victims here. The innocent victims are the voters that cast legal votes, the people who are not going to be represented in Congress. I know you're concerned about that, but it seems like that the U.S. House Democrat leadership has already indicated they're not going to seat Mr. Harris, so they're unlikely to be represented at the beginning of the term anyway. So let the investigation go and let the facts emerge. And we will abide by the facts.
Final question for you, and it has to do with the fact that the Republican majorities in the state legislature right now moving for another version of the voter ID bill. The original was struck down by federal courts because they said it targeted African Americans with, and I quote the court decision here, almost surgical precision. A study from the State Board of Elections found that if that law had been in place, it would have maybe avoided 1 out of 4.8 million votes cast being fraudulent. Do you see the irony of all the talk about in-person voter ID fraud, voter fraud, which is what voter ID is designed to combat, in-person fraud, when this has been happening on the other side, and while this is happening, legislators going back at voter ID in the Capitol?
Mr. Hayes, is it your suggestion that they should not pass voter ID?
Yes, it's my suggestion.
The problem with that is the state citizens have passed a constitutional amendment that now requires the legislature to do it. They have no choice.
Well, good luck on them for finding a good version of this, and I hope maybe they will turn their attention to what's happening down in Bladen and Robeson
I would
as well.
say, Mr. Hayes, they have expanded that vote to many more IDs, and they've tried to make sure that everybody has the ability to vote. That's all we want. We want people to be able to cast legal votes, and we want to run out corruption any way we can. And the North Carolina Republican Party will do everything, working with people like you and anybody we can, to do that.
I wish you luck in that endeavor. Is that exactly what you're into? Dallas Woodhouse, thank you. I really do want to thank you for coming on tonight. I know you guys are in a tough spot right now. It was good of you to come on.
As bad as it ever has been.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Woodhouse.